A question that we still get asked quite a lot on GMBNTech is, why is the transmission on the right-hand side of the bike? Well, I'm sure some of you will figure out that there's a right-hand thread and it's got something to do with it. There's a little bit more to it than that. So hang around to find out why horse riding cavalry, right-handed fish, and Egypt all have something to do with it. Around the world, the transmission, the chain, the cogs, all of this stuff on bicycles is pretty much seen on the right-hand side of the bike. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to that rule. You're going to see the odd left-hand drive bike or left-hand transmission bike. You're going to see left-hand transmission BMXs, single speed, but still a chain on the left. And you do see some complicated suspension designs that require a left-hand drive jackshaft system to power the right-hand side transmission on a bike. But for the most part, this is what we're familiar with, a right-hand drive transmission. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the drivetrain on my bike. Now, bear in mind that Newton's third law dictates that for every action, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. So think about this in terms of all the threads on a bike. Typically, most things are threaded clockwise or a right-handed thread. You look at the derailleur, the way it's mounted to the bike uses a right-hand thread. You look at the jockey wheel bolts, they're a right-handed thread. Even the bolts that maintain and hold the cranks in place, they're right-handed thread. There are some exceptions though. So your pedals, your right-hand pedal has a right-handed thread, your left-handed pedal has a left-handed thread. This means that they both tighten towards the front of the bike and they loosen towards the rear, essentially to prevent them working their way loose. The bottom bracket bearings though actually go the opposite way. They both tighten, so the right-hand cup and the left-hand cup tighten towards the rear of the bike. But the effect of precession on those bottom bracket bearings means that although the inside of the bearing is rotating forwards as you pedal, the outside will have a force going the opposite way. So it actually puts pressure against those threads to keep the bottom bracket exactly where it's supposed to be. But the real benefit to having a bottom bracket tightening towards the rear of the bike on most common bikes with a threaded shell like this one here is the fact that if those bearings were to seize up, your axle is not going to actually tighten those threaded cups into the frame. It's actually going to loosen them so you can get around the problem. But with the rest of the bike, as I said, it's all right-hand thread. So what would happen if you put the right-hand drivetrain on the left-hand side of the bike with a right-hand thread? Well, stuff's just going to undo. Stuff in particular like the rear cassette. Now, not strictly true actually. Let's talk about how they originally would have been on a bike. There would have been a screw-on style block. If that was to be on the left-hand side of the bike, that would certainly undo quite literally as you pedal. So the right-hand transmission was born. But why does no one do a left-hand transmission with left-handed threads to prevent this? In fact, why is everything we know so commonly a right-handed thread? If you've looked into this subject before, then you might have read that the way that we mount a bicycle is the reason the drivetrain is on the right. So let's talk about horses. So horses, or rather mounting a horse, was always being tackled from the left-hand side. Typically, you put your left foot in a stirrup and you'd swing your right over the horse. It turns out this goes back quite a long time. So in the medieval days, ancient war horses, if that's the right term, were mounted from the left. And that's because the soldiers would wear their swords on the left so they could draw them on the right. So this is my sword and this is my horse. And that makes sense given the fact that most of us are right-handed dominant, because you don't want to be swinging your big sword around with your left hand if you're trying to lop off someone's head, because it's going to make things quite difficult, isn't it? And I guess essentially what it means is we're creatures of habit, horses and humans alike. Just like bikes. But when you mount a bike from the left-hand side, it's not because you're carrying a sword on your left. It just makes a lot more sense because of the fact you put your left foot on the pedal, you push off with your right foot, and that means your stronger right leg can then get on the right pedal when it's at the top of the stroke, which means it's easy to pedal away. Now, some other theories suggest that the drivetrain was on the right-hand side of the bike because of the fact you would get on from the left. So that way it would protect your lovely clothes from getting all greasy on that transmission. But there's another level to consider, again, on top of that. Now, some of the earliest bicycles that had chains on were the safety bicycle. Now, of course, these hailed from the UK. And in this country, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, which meant you would have mounted your bicycle at the curbside from the left-hand side. And in those days, curbs would have been significantly higher, so you wouldn't want to damage the bike. And they're obviously higher because of the fact you used to mount a horse on this side of the road. Now, back to the threads I was referring to at the beginning of this video. Now, bear with me here because my history is somewhat vague, even at the best of times, but from what I can gather, Archimedes was one of the earliest adopters of the thread. Now, if you were paying any attention at school whatsoever, you'll be familiar with the Archimedes screw, which I guess you could say it's essentially a hydraulic pump used for irrigation, things like that, for moving water from lower places to higher places. I can demonstrate this moving some coffee beans from vessel to vessel here. And it's surprisingly effective how well that actually works using a thread. There we go. So essentially dating back to 234 BC, although that in itself is a little bit patchy. Anyhow, from the screw principle came the first threads used to sort of pull things together rather than lifting or moving something around. Now, the first ones were used actually for presses to extract oils from things like olives or juices from things like grapes. Now, you've got to bear in mind that this was way before the first sort of lathes existed, so these early threads were turned or cut by hand. Now, imagine being right-handed and you've got a bar in front of you that you're going to turn a thread on. Kind of logical, isn't it, that you're going to turn a right-hand thread, a right-hand thread, rather than a left-handed thread. So the right-handed thread was born. Now, when the lathe was later invented, right-hand threads became a pretty common thing just because. So the right-handed thread arguably comes from right-handed dominant people turning those right-handed threads. But why are so many people right-handed in the first place? Well, it kind of comes down to how your brain works. Now, your brain works in two halves. The left hemisphere controls the right and vice versa, so it can carry out multiple complicated calculations at the same time with different things going on. For example, it might use the left hemisphere, for example, for foraging for some food, and use the right to keep an eye out for predators. But how that handedness actually happened in the first place, no one seems to know. So if your parents were left-handed, you're more likely to develop as a left-handed person than those with right-handed parents, but you're more likely to develop as a right-handed person anyway. I know, it's complicated. But it's interesting to know that many animals and fish are actually right-handed, so to speak, as well. The goldfish, for example, I mean, I know it's not really hands, but they're right-handed as such. And bizarrely, the octopus has a favourite tentacle from which to eat its dinner. Could any of these things be anything to do with the fact that the Earth spins counterclockwise or left-handed? Who knows? So there you go, the drivetrain is on the right-hand side of the bike, pretty much because of the right-hand thread, and how we got there in a roundabout way, I think I kind of explained. Now, I did say a few times my history is somewhat patchy, so I'm sure you just have to use your imagination with some of those facts there. But either way, pretty interesting stuff, and that's why we have a transmission on the right. If you've got any more information on this, I'd love to hear from you. Please do get involved in the comments down there. If you have got one of those anomaly left-hand drive bikes, send us some pictures. We'd love to know about it, whether it's a BMX or if it is something like a Brooklyn Machine Works with a jack shaft left-hand drive system or anything like that. As always, it's been fun making a video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and we'll see you in another video soon. Take care.